In this tutorial, I want to walk you through the timeline assignment instructions. So what I'll do is give you some tips and pointers about how to complete the timeline assignment. I'll talk about the requirements for the assignment and so on. I will not show you how to post your work to Tiki-Taki. Instead, there is a separate video that focuses on that specifically. So you can watch this video to learn more about the ins and outs of the assignment, what to write, how to pick a topic, and that sort of thing. And then watch the other videos to learn how to log into Tiki-Taki and how to post your information there. Also, I wanted to point out that the version of the assignment that you're seeing is for the 8-week version of this class. I'll probably use this video for the 12 and 15-week versions of the class as well, so pay attention to the due dates. They'll be slightly different, and they will always be listed in the learning module inside Brightspace. So if the due date listed on this video looks a little weird, that might be why. All right, so I'm not going to read this word for word because you can do that, and please do read through to understand, exactly what the assignment is and what it's about. The information here at the top has to do with logging in, so you can watch the login video for that. I'm going to scroll down to the instructions part. You'll find links to all the videos that I've mentioned here. Also, it notes that there are 2 parts to the timeline assignment. The first part is the identification step. The second part is the connection step. So you'll do the most work on the identification step. That's where you will choose a topic that you read about or that has relevance to the current unit, the unit that we're currently studying. And so what I mean there is it's usually a chronological frame, something that fits within the chronology of the unit that we're working on. Unit 2, for example, is pretty wide-ranging because we look at colonial Latin American history as well as the independence era. So the independence era itself is from like 1800 to 1830 or so. But colonial history goes from, early indigenous times before Europeans arrived up until independence. There's a whole other class, History 1170, that you can and should take for that specific part. But for our class, we just are kind of doing an overview. All of that to say, in Unit 2, any of that is fair game, right? So you could write something about colonization. You could write something about the pre-Columbian settlement at Teotihuacan, or the Tuatinsuyu, the Incan Empire that existed before the arrival of the Spanish, all the way up to entries on independence in Venezuela under Simón Bolívar, and so on. So there's usually a lot that you can choose from, as long as you can find a way to relate the topic you've chosen to what we are studying. That's the point. It's to add another layer of what we're studying and explain how the topic you've chosen helps us to answer the guiding question for the unit. And I'll point out where you can find those here in just a couple of minutes if you're not sure where to find the guiding questions. But the guiding question is what focuses everything we do in each unit. All right, so again, you'll identify a person, event, or theme. That's the topic. As you're reading, as you're doing the readings and watching the videos and listening to the podcast, you'll use that guiding question, and you'll use, I want to learn more about this person, or they didn't talk about any women in this certain society. I want to find out about that. And so you might do some research and identify a topic around that to add something, one of the gaps that there is in the materials that we have for class. Those are great ways of approaching this. And again, you'll always want to make sure that what you're doing relates in some way to answering the guiding question for the unit. Please do be aware that you cannot choose a topic that someone else has posted to the timeline. So that means that you need to go to the timeline. There's a link at the top of this document. There's also a link in Brightspace and in the syllabus as well. You'll go to the class timeline, and you will look to see whether or not someone else has posted the event or the person or the theme that you wanted to choose. If not, that's great. then you just start an entry where you put the title of that topic and your name. That's all you have to do. You don't have to finish it. Just put the name and your name, the name of the topic and your name. Also, the time frame. You need to put it in the correct place roughly on the timeline. That way, other people will be able to see that you've claimed that topic. If someone has taken the topic you wanted, you can try to do something that relates to that topic. So I've noted here that you need to be careful of events or themes that have different names for the same thing, such as the U.S.-Mexican War or the War of North American Invasion. They're both the same thing, just different perspectives and the name given from different places. But if someone had already taken U.S.-Mexican War and you wanted to do that topic, you might choose something like Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who was the Mexican president and general, sort of infamous for all the problematic things that he did relative to the war. So again, you could choose Santa Anna if that was already taken as an example. Once you have a topic, you've claimed it on the placeholder, that's when you'll go do the work to create the bulk of the entry for the ID step. You'll write this in a Word document. Part of the reason for this is that once you've written it in a Word document, you can just copy and paste to Tiki-Taki. Tiki-Taki can be finicky sometimes, especially if there are multiple or a few of us trying to use it at the same time. Sometimes it will kick you out. And so the idea here is that you will not lose your work. So complete it in a Word document, send it to Writespace, and then if something does go wrong with Tiki-Taki, it's okay. You don't have to worry. So it's just kind of a layer of making sure that nothing is lost there. But the work on Tiki-Taki is what allows us to see each other's work, to read each other's posts and make connections. So it is important that we have our stuff there. But this is a sort of backup, I guess. All right, so in your Word document, and there is an example down here, you can click on this link there to see an example. It's the one that I will actually use to show you how to put your information into Tiki-Taki. But you can look at that to see what it looks like in practice to do this assignment on the Word document. And so I've listed the 4 elements that you need. First, the name of the topic, the specific date range. Second, URL or citation, if your information came from a book or a non-website, for an outside source. So you're going to add an additional source of information that was not assigned for class, something not in our materials that gives either a new perspective, maybe it's a primary source on this topic that we didn't get to look at in the problems reader. There's a wide range of choices, and you can just do some internet research. You can use Google. You can use Google Scholar. It's a good idea to use CNN libraries as well. If you have any questions about how to do those things, don't hesitate to reach out to me and I can help. You want to avoid Wikipedia, biography, or encyclopedia sites just because those don't really add interpretive details. They add kind of the basic facts, which is important. You need to have the facts. But we're also trying to evaluate the different ways that historians and other writers, scholars, observers have interpreted the events that we're examining, right? So we're thinking about not just what happened, but what was said to have happened. And looking at those different perspectives together, that's when we make our own interpretation. And so I'll get to that in just a second. But you will then, so you add the URL or citation for your outside source, number 2. Number 3, you need to put in you need to put in a video or an image. So URL is just the link. And I'll show you how to add that in the other video. But you need to go and find one, either a video that discusses the topic that you've chosen or an image that illustrates it. If you find that the topic you've chosen has neither, there's not a great video or there's not a good image to illustrate it, you can just find something related. You could do a map of Latin America, if it comes to it, but just something to have that visual aspect on the timeline as we create it together. Fourth, you'll write a couple of paragraphs, at least one, probably 2, where you explain what the topic you've chosen is and how it is significant to the guiding question for the unit. And again, you can look at the example that I created to see how you might approach doing that. But you want to, in specific terms, say this is the topic, this is the who, what, why, where, when, and well, probably the who, what, when, and then the why is the part where you will draw your own conclusions and connect the dots for us to explain why it's important to study the Catholic Church, for example, if we're trying to address the Unit 2 guiding question about how colonial institutions shaped the way independence played out in Latin America. And you give an example of why that institution, Catholic Church, is a colonial institution, what kinds of influence it had on different independence movements. So again, you'll use that to explain the relationship to the question and to make an interpretation of your own. All right, so that's kind of the basics for the ID step. Again, depending on what class you are in, those will be due at different times during the unit. In the longer term semesters, the units usually span 2 weeks. In the 8-week class, it's only 1 week, so that means that the ID step is due Thursday. If you're in the 15-week class, it'll probably be due on the second Wednesday of the unit. It just sort of depends on how long the course is that you are taking in terms of the time it covers. All right, let's see. So please do take advantage also of the FAQ in case you're wondering about anything that I haven't covered here. So that's the first part. That's the first part of the timeline assignment. The second part is the connection step. And this is where you will go consult the timeline and look to see if anyone in the class has entered a topic that connects to your own. Hopefully they have. Sometimes we cover a span of such long span of chronology that it might not be the case that someone has posted a topic that really connects to yours. If that's the case, choose a topic that you've come across as you did the research for the ID step that you know connects to your topic for the ID step, and write a short connection paragraph that you then post at the end of your own ID step. If you're writing a connection that connects to someone else's topic, you want to add that to the timeline post that they've made. So, for example, if you have posted on Santa Ana and you want to connect to the person's entry on the US-Mexico War, you would write the paragraph that explains what the connection between those two topics is and why it matters. And then you would write that in a Word document. Always do that because you're going to submit it to Brightspace and to Tiki-Taki, just as that layer of kind of backup. So you write the paragraph, and then you post that at the end of your classmate's entry. And again, consult the tutorial on that to see how to add things to Tiki-Taki. If you've had to choose a topic that was not posted to the timeline, you add the paragraph at the end of your own timeline entry for that unit and just say, I didn't find a topic that connected to mine, but as I did my research, I saw that this one did, and then explain what the connection is. You don't have to create a new timeline entry to make a connection, if that makes sense. You don't need to write you don't need to make 2 ID step entries if there's not one that connects to yours. Hopefully that makes sense. The connection step is always due on the last day of the unit, whether that's just the Sunday of the week or if it's the second Sunday of the unit, depending on, again, which length of semester we're talking about. All right. And that is, you can scroll down. I'll fix the evaluation rubrics. They're not displaying correctly right now, but I'll take care of that real quick after I close this video. Do pay attention to the extra credit timeline evaluation. It's an option you have toward the end of the semester. Once you've completed all of the timeline entries, you can create your own timeline or your own Adobe Spark, where you answer some questions that I've posed about the kinds of choices you make about choosing historical topics and so on. But I pointed out now just so that you can kind of make sure you keep track of your timeline entries and you save those Word documents even after you've submitted them to Blackboard, so that you could do that if you want. All right. I hope that's helpful. Please don't hesitate to ask questions whenever you have them. I'm here to support and help. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you all come up with on our class timeline.